Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources podcast, the BERcast. We're back after a hiatus for a few weeks, a little bit of a summer vacation. Everybody enjoys it. We're here to talk with some esteemed colleagues about the advancements in the International Energy Conservation Code, specifically talking about what to expect with the 2024 IECC as well as the 2027 IECC. And I got my Lions hat on here. It's feeling a little bit like fall. It's crisp, getting to be football weather here in August. Man, I'm happy for it because it has been too hot and humid out here in Detroit. Here on the BERcast, we've kind of changed the format. We got to get down to the action because we don't have time to talk about sports all day long. But I'll just say, looking forward to the football season. I think we got some cool things on the way in that regard here in Detroit. Although I got to admit, my man Rich there, you must be. Are you a Commanders fan, Rich?
No, Ravens. We play you guys week
All right,
2.
that's the right answer.
Yeah.
On
week
BERcast,
2.
we hate the Commanders. It's a terrible name. We shouldn't go back to the old name, but they should have picked a different name. But regardless, all right, I'm here with Jerica Stacey with the International Code Council, Rich Truitt, former guest with Harford County, Maryland, a code official, and also a voting member of the 2024 and the 2027 IECC development committees. And then we have our awesome La Maestra, Gayathri Vijayakumar. She is not a voting member for 2027 for the broader committee, but she is on a modeling subgroup. And so she is involved in 2027 and was very much involved in 2024. Y'all might remember about a year ago or so, we had a episode where we talked specifically about some of the controversy with the 2024 IECC. You can go back and re-listen to that one if you want to. We won't dig out the skeletons this episode. Basically, I've invited these professionals to come on the BERcast because there's a lot of talk around states about advancing energy codes potentially to the 2024 IECC. And that is the most recent version. So it would make sense if a state's going to step up and advance their code. They would probably want to consider the latest and greatest. But also, I would say that there's a lot of sort of interest overall in the 2024 because it's perceived to be, compared to the 2021, more builder friendly. The NAHB says the 2024 Energy Code features more flexibility for builders. And so, coming straight from the words of the home builders, which are not generally super excited about code changes, they feel that the 2024 compared to the 2021 prioritizes cost effectiveness and consumer benefits, maximizes design choices for builders, and can be more practically implemented in the field. It's anticipated, interestingly enough, that the code is going to be about 7% more efficient than the 2021. I guess at first blush, these two things don't quite make sense to me. How is a builder supposed to be excited about a code that is seemingly on paper more stringent? And reviewing the code myself, I can't say that I totally get it. I'm not sure why builders think that this is like the smoking gun to assuage all their concerns about cost or process in the code, but that's what we're here to talk about. Thanks to my colleagues for being on here. I'm going to go ahead and put Jerica on the spot here, given that she represents the horse's mouth from the ICC. Jerica, from your perspective, why do you think that the builders are somewhat excited about the 2024 IECC? And what do you think the big rub is there for them that they're willing to say, yeah, let's go in that direction?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, thank you for having me on the BERcast. This is my first time, and I'm really excited to be here, especially with Rich and Gayathri, because I respect all three of you so much. And before I get started, thanks, Rich and Gayathri, for all of the work that you did on the 2024 IECC and that you continue to do on the 2027. We could not do it without volunteers like the two of you who give up so much of your time to be able to move us forward on the energy code. I think that, Chris, you already nailed it in your introduction. There's a lot of flexibility in the 2024. And that's what I'm hearing from our home builders, that they really like the more complete list of additional energy efficiency options. I think especially for home builders that are doing a lot of spec homes or they're building out an entire development, they're able to hone in on one of those options and apply it to all their homes and build them the same way. So I think flexibility is really key. I think that the participation that we had from the home builders in the development of the 2024 has really increase their interest in it. I joke sometimes and say it's having your kid cook with you in the kitchen. They're going to be more likely to eat that food after they've helped you prepare that recipe. And also, I think that the change in the attic insulation R value, the rollback to 2018 values, has given the 2024 a little bit more appetite in the
That's it. You nailed it. That's all they saw. They saw that the R60 was gone, and that's all they cared about. Woo, we're back to R49 in the attic. Sensibility is won over. Down with R60. Shall it never appear again? Okay, anything else, Jerica, from your perspective, other than that R60 is gone forever?
No.
Okay,
I think
hey,
so.
That's an easy win. It's good to have, we have Jerica, we'll say, consider her from the policy community. We got Rich from the code community. We got Gayathri representing the third-party verification community. I'm going to put on my builder hat here because if y'all didn't know, your good buddy Chris Mack is a licensed home builder in the state of Michigan. That's right. Don't ask me to go pound a nail because it may not go in totally straight, but I am a licensed home builder, so I'm going to put on my builder hat here and kick the tires on this a little bit. But yeah, I like that R60 being gone. Rich, as a code official, what do you see in the 2024? Why do you think that states are potentially looking at this? Is Maryland looking at the 2024?
Again, thanks, Chris, for having me on. It's a pleasure being back. And again, working with Gayathri and Jerica, great colleagues in the profession. And Gayathri and I have really, on the 27, really have aligned to try to help make improvements and the efforts that we're doing. So I think things are going in the right direction. Yeah, Maryland, we are one of the leaders mandated by state legislation that we have to adopt the 2021 or the latest edition within 18 months of publication by IECC at the state level. And then jurisdictions have another year. So within typically 2.5 years at my local level, I'm adopting the latest edition of the codes, and energy being one of them. I'm going to piggyback on something that Jerica said, the flexibility and the rollback. That was key. We deal with everything from the national home builder to the local home builder to the Johnny homeowner that is building their own house. So that flexibility does provide us as code officials an easier route to try to help those individuals that maybe, hey, this is the first time that you're going to build a house, that you're trying to find all these products at your local home center and you can't match up that one-to-one what the code says to what I can buy off the shelf. And that flexibility that 408 provides. Now in 21 we only really saw 5 major category options, and now we've got almost 30 some options in 408 and broken down into all the different climate zones. So that provides us as code officials a little bit easier way to say, hey, look at this option and let me know if that's something that is acceptable to you, i.e. put all your ducks inside the thermal envelope. That's a real easy win that most people are doing in our locale or our climate zone that we see here in Maryland. It's not a big stretch to get that 1 or 2 person home builder that they're building 2 or 3 units a year, or even that Johnny homeowner building their only house that they're ever going to build. That provides some good flexibility. I think some of the other things that we saw in the software updates and the requirements in 405 and 406, where now we have that software that there is reporting tools have to be validated through the ANSI standard, which is much better for a code official that I can go to a one-stop shop and make sure that software has been third-party accredited through some type of evaluation process, and I can feel comfortable enough accepting results out of the software. Really, then we're just going to be looking at, is the entity that's entering that information into the software entering the correct information, but we've got confidence that the software is giving us the right results. So there's some of the things that I'm excited about when we get to 24.
Okay, very good. And last but not least, Gayathri, how you feeling? What do you think about the 2024? Why do you think that builders are so excited about it? What is the rub here? Because I keep saying, other than R60, this looks like a code that actually is probably more stringent, all things considered. I think it's a smarter code than even the 2021, but I'm not necessarily seeing it as some salvo necessarily to the perceived affordability issues with the energy code. So, what's your take?
I think based on, it's all about the flexibility, right? So in entering those conversations with the builders, that jump to R60 was very expensive. And so when we were talking about how do we advance this code, their main point was like, how do we reduce the costs? And so we actually had, in the 2024, we had PNNL analyze the cost effectiveness of that jump from 49 to 60, and it wasn't cost effective. So the savings were so low. So that was one of the things where we said, okay, if we did bring this back, what are the other things that you guys are willing to do? What else can we add? So that's where you see these smaller improvements, like air leakage metrics got a little bit tighter. You saw that change in the percent savings required in R405. You see all the ERI scores drop by 1 point. So very modest improvements and gains in these other areas, but possible because we recognize that the cost of that one insulation measure was a lot. And it's funny because it's just a visual thing. In most cases, you can use that UA trade-off. Now it's called the thermal conductance alternative, right? So it's not that anyone actually had to do R60 in those attics, but I think that trade-off, a lot of people don't realize there's that trade-off. You can just do res check, or you can do that UA trade-off and never have to do R60 if you can make it up elsewhere. But I think visibly, it looks like that part's easier, and it's easier to swallow the other increases. In terms of 406, I think there was just a lot of representing the raters, clean up a lot of mess in R406. I can't guarantee that it'll become the most popular compliance pathway, but we removed a lot of like the clunkiness. The 2 envelope backstops based on your solar, your limit on solar. There was that ventilation deviation. So just a lot of like mistakes were done in 406. So I think the 2024, for whoever chooses that path, I think that gets cleaned up pretty nicely. And I think the 408 credits, I think we hear both that folks like it because it's flexible, but I think we hear also that it makes it more complicated. It's longer. Rich said there's over 30 measures here. I think the benefit of this, and it's not going away in 2027. In fact, there's going to be more credits in 2027 and most likely a higher credit requirement. So I think the value in this table for the builder is now, like the 2021, you had 5 packages, but you really didn't know that they were equivalent in performance. Right? So you couldn't tell that the envelope package yielded as much savings as the ERV package. So as a builder, you're lost like, hey, this package costs $5,000, this upgrade's only $10. Which one gets more savings? So here, because PNNL analyzes each measure and quantifies the site energy savings, you can look as a builder and say, hey, this upgrade costs this much amount of money in my hometown. Not of this, hey, in New York it's this, and Alabama it's this. You can think for yourself and say, this is the cost for this measure, and it only yields 7 points. But if I do this other measure, it yields 2 points, right? So a builder has a lot more information without having to go through the price of doing energy modeling. So for those who like the credit system, it's getting longer, more measures are being added. For those who didn't like it, I'm sorry, it's here to stay.
Yeah, and as a builder here, I would just say, I just want somebody to tell me what I got to do. And so I may very want to work with a home energy rater or another approved third-party compliance professional. And I've done that cost compliance method. Used to be called the simulated performance alternative. Then it became the total building performance alternative. Now it's called the simulated building performance compliance path. We've had it all different names over the last several code cycles, but it all means the same thing. Ultimately, basically, we have to have a as-built home, a proposed home that is demonstrated and validated to cost less than a standard reference design for heating, cooling, water heating, and mechanical ventilation. You don't get credit for appliances in this. My rater told me that. So that's a little bit of a sneaky thing. But my rater also told me that in previous versions of the code, I couldn't get any credit for my 95% efficient furnace that I was putting in my house. And that just didn't seem fair to me. I'm spending extra money in order to put in a more efficient furnace, and I didn't get any credit for that. Guess what? My rater told me that now in the 2024 code, I am going to get credit for that. Having a mechanical system trade-offs is back in the code. So the reference home has the same fuel as whatever I'm using. So nobody's trying to tell me how to build a house, whether I can have gas or electricity. Basically, if I choose a heat pump, it's going to comply with the reference home's going to have a federal minimum heat pump, and so is a furnace or a boiler. And so I'm ecstatic about this, because way back in the 2006 IECC, I got credit for that 95% furnace, and from 2009 till 2021, I didn't get any credit for that 95% furnace. What do you think, Gayathri? Should I be pretty excited about this palpable trade-off within the R405 building performance alternative methodology, or is there something else I got to pay attention to there?
I have two thoughts about this.
Okay.
I have long just wanted to get rid of R405.
Ooh.
I didn't think we needed a redundant modeling pathway. Let's just fix ERI, have one modeling pathway. So I've tried twice to delete R405. I didn't actually know the history that you just described, that you used to have this equipment trade-off and then it disappeared.
Raters can learn a thing or two from builders.
There's two groups of people. Some people wanted the R405 to be the way it was, no HVAC trade-offs. As a newcomer to the codes world in 2024, I didn't see the reason to exclude HVAC and hot water. We allow it in the ERI. Every above code program, they understand that the path to net zero is inclusive of equipment efficiency. And so again, it was a consensus discussion. So to allow credit for that 95 AFE furnace or cold climate heat pump, they just wanted to make sure it wasn't like full savings, your whole code compliance was through this one piece of equipment. They wanted to make sure we don't sacrifice the longevity of the envelope or other longer lasting energy saving measures of your home. And so that's why you see in this section that for a home, it's not just you had to beat the standard reference design. Now you do have to have 20 or 15% savings. So we had PNNL analyze this to make sure that if you did get a 95 AFUE furnace, you get a little credit for it. But we were trying to mitigate kind of the credit you would get for just doing like an 82 AFUE furnace.
Wait a second.
Right?
So if the baseline's 80% furnace, because that's the federal minimum, and I put it in my 95%, that means I'm getting 15%, but you're telling me I got to be 20% better? It seems like this is actually going to be harder for me.
It could be. So I think that's what we need to see. How have people been approaching this? And what we had PNNL do was to determine what these percent multipliers, how much percent savings. And so they just modeled a piece of equipment that could be selected from R408, because we wanted, another thing people wanted in the 2024 was more parity between the three compliance pathways. As we all know, in the HERS rating world, like ERI is not a compliance path anyone uses because it's so hard. The ERI targets are so stringent. It's easier to do code compliance through 408 or 405 and then just use your ERI for Energy Star or Zero Energy Ready homes, right? Like people do two pathways because the targets are too hard. And so with that parity, we asked PNNL, hey, the same home that's getting 10 credits in R408, when you model that using R405, what percent savings are they getting? And that's what we use to determine that 80 and 85. They're using what you would have done in R408 to minimize this kind of game planning between which pathway requires the least amount of energy upgrades.
I appreciate that. And of course, I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek here with my builder hat on. But in a lot of
I really thought you were going to switch hats, like literally take your Lion's hat and put on a different one. Or like, yeah, backwards. There we go. Now you're a Raider?
And now I'm the builder. All right, wait. I'm going to put my Raider hat back on. So as the Raider, the rub about this and why I'm making such a big deal about this is there are essentially two things that I think builders got really excited about the 2024 about. R60, get rid of that. And again, you may think, yeah, that it does seem a lot. But compared to R49, we're talking about R11, which is essentially 3 or maybe 4 inches more insulation. it doesn't really seem that big of a deal in the scheme of things. But whatever, if people they're excited about that. But the other thing was equipment trade-offs being back in the performance method, because people have been asking this forever. And the point that I'm trying to get to is that, because if we go back here to how to actually meet it, the rub is here. Whereas all the other code versions of the code here, 2006 through 2021, the as proposed home, or the actual constructed home as verified, had to cost less to operate than the reference home. Now, it's not good enough just to cost $1 less. You have to cost 20% less, or 15% less in the case of an electrically heated home. And so, yes, you get equipment trade-offs, but you have to be some percentages better. And so I guess the point that I'm getting at is, to me, it seems like a wash. If I'm the builder putting in a 95% furnace, yes, you'll get approximately 15% back on your space heating, but then you'll have to make up that extra 5% either in cooling or in water heating someplace. And so I think in the end of the day, it's going to be a little bit of a wash compared to the 2021. And then, interestingly enough, the backstop for what the thermal envelope has to be, I think, has gotten actually maybe a little bit more stringent here. I would say at least better defined. I can't say whether it's more or less stringent. I haven't necessarily done that math yet. But the cool thing about this is now all of the compliance paths, all the performance-based ones, so be it R405, R406, the ERI, or if you're using an above code program as an alternative compliance method in Chapter 1, which is permitted, no matter what, you still have to have this thermal enclosure backstop, basically. And the idea here is that we don't want people to just be basically achieving all their savings with mechanical systems. We still want them to have some basically improvement in the building enclosure over time. And it depends on what climate you're in. Most of the climates of the country, you're allowed to be basically 15% less stringent than the 2024 code. So that offers quite a bit of flexibility, but it doesn't offer you absolute flexibility. I focus a lot on R405 just because I see a lot of raters participating in this. Why? Because it's been the path of least resistance. As Gayathri mentioned, ERI really hasn't made it to the mainstream by and large because the scores haven't been calculated consistently. There's been some weird modifications of the ERI calculation that were both in the 2018 and 2021 codes. The 2015 code probably started us off a little bit too stringent comparative to the other compliance paths. So I think the ERI is going to finally have its day in the sun with the 2024. Rich, as a code official, is there a compliance path you're gunning for? Are you going to push somebody to any one of these because you think it's going to either be the path of least resistance or a little bit just more nimble? Or are you agnostic about the compliance paths?
Wow. So from my perspective as a code official, obviously all the compliance paths are equally available to anyone that wants to use them and to comply. I really can't push or nudge somebody into one or the other. Now I'll take off my code official hat and I'll put on my personal hat. I kind of like the 405 and the 406 compliance paths just because it does provide us a clean package as when it gets to us as a code official. We've got the software, we've got a rater that's involved. We take out a lot of ambiguity. We have somebody that we're communicating with that has a basis and an understanding of the energy code. Not that builders or John Q. homeowner doesn't, but they're going to be speaking at a very similar level of knowledge that the code officials are. Those do make it much easier for us as code officials to look at these packages, even if it's a res check package that does help us. And then we can push that package out from a plan review standpoint. In the beginning of the project, we're making sure that it complies with the code before we issue that permit. And then as we move forward into design and construction, after design, but into construction, we're able to push that information out. And that's one of the things. I've got the pleasure of being one of the ICC instructor. And when I'm teaching energy code, that's to my colleagues in different parts of the country. It's one of the things I'm trying to convey is, hey, you just can't leave that documentation sit in a file or sit in the plan review portion of your software. That's got to get pushed out to the inspection side. As difficult as that may physically sound, it makes it so much easier and streamlined for us to enforce from a code official standpoint. So that from a personal standpoint makes it a little bit more difficult when we're doing the prescriptive compliance pass, just because you can't go to a local home center, like I said before, and make a one-to-one comparison to what's in the chart to go pulling it off the shelf for your fenestration, or even not fenestration, but for your thermal envelope provisions. Personally, I did performance pass, but obviously I can't push one over another as being a code official.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you being political and then telling it the way that it is. And it's refreshing to hear that from a code official. Hear that, Raiders? Code officials want to work with us. They think that there's a big opportunity for us because it's going to make their job easier. Ultimately, they can see in the software reports exactly what we have said is supposed to be going into the home, and it gives them more assurance of validation. And to me, I've always, and somebody's criticized me, Chris, you got to get on these development committees, but I've actually always felt, I think we should almost be leading the code with, here's the goal of savings we're hoping to get, and here's the performance methodologies first. And then prescriptive is like the alternative, because at least in my neck of the woods, very few people are complying prescriptively. And I know that varies by region. I think especially when you get into these more advanced versions of code, to Gayathri's point, they should start to all, from a kind of an equivalency, they should all start to be more similar. But I've always felt like this prescriptive idea, it makes the code really long, for one thing, and then it like has big scary numbers that make people feel like they must build and design a house a certain way. And I think that builders, again, being a builder, I'm an independent kind of a person. I don't want people telling me what to do. I want to design and choose what I want to put in my house. I don't want somebody to have to tell me. And yeah, I understand there's laws and we got to meet certain things with energy, but I want my options. Jerica, being a policy professional, tell us a little bit more maybe about the prescriptive path and why you think in the 2024 maybe it hit the right overall package where it may be more palatable for me as a builder.
Sure. One thing I did want to mention that I jotted down when we were talking about the thermal envelope backstop before we talk about performance or prescriptive. The other thing that I really like about having that consistent envelope backstop is that now all of our requirements are within this code version. And I think that's really important, especially for someone like me who works with international clients. Sometimes the first time a country is adopting the code, it's going to be the 2024 or the 2021 IECC. And if it's the 2021, those backstops really complicate things because now we have to go back to the 2009 or the 2015 and pull in those prescriptive tables so that they have something to reference. But the 2024 is really cleaning this up so that now we're staying within this document itself. And I think that's really part of why this is more palatable, is that there are these editorial changes and these cleanup changes that just make implementation and enforcement a little bit easier. But
yeah, so let me just quickly piggyback on that. No, so what Jerica is saying is previous iterations of the code, like the 2021, would say if you're doing R405, there is a thermal envelope backstop, but you have to be X amount within the 2009 IECC. So it was like we were referencing an older, different code in order to demonstrate compliance within our current code. And look, software programs can be configured that way, but if you're trying to communicate that to a community adopting a new code and they don't have those old books, that makes it very difficult from a policy as well as an enforcement standpoint. So I think you're right. I think within the 2024, it's a big deal that all of the alternate pathways, and I'm showing here basically the ability to use an above code program, is directly baked into chapter 1, but that R405 and R406, the thermal envelope backstops are all the same. And I agree with you. I think that's a big enhancement.
Thank you. Yeah. And if we go back to talking about the prescriptive compliance path, I live somewhere where nobody's using performance as an option. We're very focused on the prescriptive path because by and large, it's a little bit easier to just make a checklist at the building department, check off what you need to do for the builders and for the code officials as well. It's very straightforward. It gets complicated in some areas, but it really allows itself to be used almost as a checklist. And folks know going into it exactly what their R value has to be, exactly the performance testing that's going to be required, and that sort of thing. It also depends, you mentioned a little bit about software availability and also the availability of third-party professionals that can do the modeling. We don't have, in my home state, I live in Idaho, we don't have a lot of HERS raters. And so that really does take the ERI off of the table for most of our jurisdictions, especially our more rural jurisdictions. They're not going to use R406. And they need somebody that knows how to use the software to do R405. And it's hard to come by, but I think the other side of it, Chris, is the code officials themselves and what they expect with documentation. I think Rich really hit on this earlier, that if you're using R405 or R406, the compliance documentation these days is really helpful. It's really straightforward. You get a really clean package. But unless you're a code official who has had exposure to these compliance path options, you don't even realize the documentation that you're going to get with them. And so for a lot of code officials, I don't want to speak for all of them, but for some of them that are in these more rural areas, R405 and R406 are very intimidating. And until you've seen the documentation to realize it is still straightforward, much like a checklist, and on the prescriptive side, you don't really understand what you're missing there. So I think that's why folks still tend to lean
and
towards
Chris, let me
prescriptive.
jump in there because Jerica brought up a good point about the documentation. It can be a little intimidating, especially because all the softwares that are out there, are different software options, provide you a different type of report. And you have to be able to ascertain or look at that report and understand what it's telling you and look at the different sections to be able to bring it all together. So, yeah, I agree with that point that until you get that familiarity, and we see one or two different softwares pretty consistently, but when we get something new in here, then it does take us a lot longer, and it can be a little bit intimidating, if not challenging, to make sure that the software is working correctly. So that's one of the things I love about 24 is that we have that ANSI accredited software standard that it has to meet.
Yeah, very important, without a doubt, that software for a code official, you want to have confidence that when you're evaluating the paperwork, that the software itself is not an outlying factor, without a doubt. So I definitely think that is an improvement. Jerica?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that confidence factor is really important with software. And the other side that we've already talked a little bit about is that there's now more confidence that all of the compliance paths are going to get you to relatively the same place. And I think that there's been a lot of misinformation before, where if you're using a performance path, you have to go well above what is required prescriptively with the code. And so I think now, largely because of the analysis that Pacific Northwest National Laboratory has done for us, we feel really confident that those three compliance paths are also going to get you to the same place at the end of the day.
Yeah, and having read through the whole code, I would tend to agree with it. I do think that this is maybe the most balanced code that's been put out thus far. I still think that performance-wise, you may be able to get there in a little bit more of a streamlined fashion, or at least the work that you put into doing prescriptive, if you have the ability to work with an approved third party who can do a software performance trade-off, you might be just as well off. Because prescriptive, now similar to the 2021 IECC, basically when you're doing prescriptive, you have to meet these additional energy efficiency packages that come from R408. I guess one enhancement I see for the way this is outlined, the compliance options versus 2021, is that these additional efficiency packages are only relevant rather to the prescriptive option. So only if you're doing prescriptive, versus the simulated performance and the ERI, they have their savings baked into the specific subchapters, 405 and 406. Versus in the 2021, it was like for ERI, you had to meet this score, but then 5% better than this score. That was just goofy. And I get what they were trying to do, but it made it more complicated than it needed to be, especially if you're a builder. I think it's really, builders want to see, I got to meet a score. I'm used to doing hers. Tell me the score I got to meet. And that just made it a little bit goofy, similar to the simulated performance. It was a little bit goofy. So I like the fact that it's separate. We already kind of showed the table from our 408. There's more paths to success now. You got to earn at least 10 credits if you're going prescriptive. And so if I'm a builder, I'm probably going to go for the big hitters. So I'm in climate zone 5. So here we go on the table. Wow, I can have a 30% reduction in total conductance. And put a pin in that one. We're going to get to that in a second. But basically that means the building enclosure efficiency. More or less, if I have a passive house level of envelope efficiency, by and large, then I'm going to be compliant with the code. That seems fair. Let's see. If I have a ground source heat pump, wow, all you got to do is put in geothermal, and then I'm there. That's good to go. Okay, any other?
Not quite though, Chris. Not quite.
No? Okay.
Because you have to get those 10 points from at least 2 credits.
Whoa.
So you can do that 15,
I'm
but
a
here I
builder.
want
I
to
just
show you.
want simple numbers. Simple. These are 2 numbers. I wanted 1 number, but that's okay. Thank
I know,
you.
but I want to show you something really cool about this table. If you go to the very bottom,
Okay.
you're going to get to higher efficiency lighting. And if you look at this, you're going to think that we're all crazy. We put 0 in here for all climate zones if you put higher efficiency lighting in there. But that is low-hanging fruit. For you to put in higher efficiency lighting, it's not going to cost that much. And you'll see you get 0 points. But if you use this measure in combination with that geothermal heat pump we just talked about, you've met your 2 measure requirements and you got this kind of low-hanging fruit with that higher efficacy lighting. So just remember you have to do 2 measures.
As a builder and as a rater, I think that is goofy. That's okay. I will leave it at that. So there you go. So all I have to do is my geothermal, because the code already requires me to have high efficacy lighting anyways.
It's higher efficacy.
Oh, higher. Okay. All right. Fair enough. So long story short, you got to meet 10 points, at least 2 categories. Thank you very much for pointing that out, because that is an important omission I almost made. Going back to my thing about total conductance. Gayathri, you're the biggest nerd on here aside from me. Tell us what total conductance is and why is it different than what we had before? And so why should I care as a builder?
Sure. All right. So I think it's thermal conductance. So we'll start with that. So this is the old UA trade-off, right? So the point is you have these prescriptive tables with R values and U factors for windows, but mathematically, to get the R's and the U's to compare, you had to turn all those R's into U factors. All right, so that seems understood. People could trade off wall performance for that R60 attic insulation. You could beef up your walls, you could do triple pane windows, and then R60 could come down using this component performance alternative. Used to be the total UA alternative or something. So it's just switched terminology, and the key reason is because when you talk about the R value for your slab insulation, there's no U factor for slab insulation. It's just R values or this new thing called F factors. And so what P&L did was they developed this approach. So if we stop calling it UA, we can now trade off our slab insulation. So you could offset where you aren't unable to put slab insulation for some reason. You can still meet the overall code envelope requirements by beefing up something else. And so if you see in that equation, you got U times A, that's your U factor times an assembly that has an area. And you have your F factor, and that P is perimeter. So we're talking about the slab edge perimeter. So now you have a way where you can trade these 2 different assemblies off together. I think this might have been done inadvertently by certain program software. So now it's been fine-tuned that you can trade it off using TC. And I think that's the value of it. The F factor is not something we talked about, but the 2024, there's lots of things that improve, like we've talked about it, but it added those F factors. And so that different configurations of slab edge insulation can now show compliance.
Okay. Yeah. I think this is a step forward. I'm always nervous as a trainer, as an educator. I feel like it's taken us long enough to explain what a UA is, and people just started to get it, and now we're calling it a TC. But I understand the physics behind it, and that's okay. Long story short, Total UA compliance, that one's gone. And now we've got thermal conductance compliance, more or less the same thing, except for perhaps some more trade-offs associated with slabs. Okay. Anything else to point out, maybe more just from the main body of the code, sections 402 through 404? Rich, anything stand out to you as being like awesome or not so good, or just something that people should pay
Oh, wow.
attention to?
I think really the work that we did on third party compliance, I know it's not specific to the questions you have, but I think that third party compliance is definitely a step in the right direction. I see third party compliance from a jurisdictional standpoint as anywhere from not accepting anything from a third party to the third party completing the every bit of compliance verification and providing that to the jurisdiction. So we're that hybrid. So we're still having our inspectors out validating everything other than having to do the testing, air tightness testing, duct testing, things like that. We did some improvements there. You and I are going to do a class at the annual conference for ICC together where we're going to talk about this and what does that mean, and hopefully try to bring the code officials together to understand those changes. So I'm really happy about where we went with that. I think we still have a little bit more room to go. I think moving forward, trying to understand really what the scoping of the residential provisions are and narrowing that down a little bit. Gayathri and I have done a lot of work in 27 together on one of her proposals and trying to make strides there. So I think we can benefit from the strides that we see that we're going to make in 27 and correlate those to already in 24 because the scoping's fairly close in those. So those are some of the exciting things that I see that out of the energy code that I think are going to be important factors moving forward, especially for us.
Yeah, Rich, you and I have been frequent tag team partners in presentations about the role of third party verification. As a ResNet board member, I've been a huge advocate for closing the loop and making sure that raters participating in third party energy code verification, there's more of a consistent system for that. Still a work in progress, but we're going to get there one of these days. Jerica, what do you see out of the 2024 that if you had to highlight one thing, you're like, wow, this is a big deal change that people should know about? Maybe something we haven't talked about already.
Yeah, just watching you scroll through those, I think existing buildings is a good topic. I don't know if you want to go there, but I do think that there was a good amount of effort put forward in the 2024 consensus committees to improve the efficiency of our existing buildings as well. So you're going to see an introduction of some of those additional energy efficiency options for our existing buildings as well to start moving forward with efficiency for the biggest use of energy, which is our existing buildings.
I like that. And that's so important. Again, as an educator who teaches on the energy code, particularly test prep, there's actually a pretty big part of the test when you go to become a residential inspector or plans examiner that deals with the application of the energy code to existing buildings. And yeah, man, if people have taken a long time to understand UA compliance, man, Chapter 5 just is, it's not something that I feel has been wrapped around nearly enough. I live in a part of the country that is redeveloping. Y'all have probably heard a thing or two about Detroit. Lots of abandoned houses here. And the good news is that we knocked down a bunch of them that couldn't be saved, but we kept a lot that could, and people are buying them and they're renovating them. But I don't necessarily see people always going as far as to improving them up to what we would consider to be a modern level of performance for the home, which is a missed opportunity. I think that definitely leaning into improving our existing building stock is something that everybody should get behind, because that is the majority of our homes. And people who own existing buildings, they need to have the benefits of comfort and resilience and energy savings as much as anybody else. Gayathri, what's the one thing, from you? If you had to push someone to just understand one thing about the 2024 and why it's awesome, what would it be?
I need more than one thing.
Okay.
Can I get two? All right. So this is just a piggyback on what Jerica identified with the two measures. In that section in R408, also don't miss the large home adder, right? So in the R408, when you're picking your 10 credits across two measures, the next sentence also says if your home is larger, 5,000 square feet or larger, you actually had to pick up 5 more credits. And similarly in R405, you have to save more energy. So I'm not sure that that's the most exciting thing, but I just want to make sure it's not missed. So
Yeah,
that's my
that's a
bucket
good
for things.
point.
Don't
Yes,
miss
so
this sentence. Yeah.
yeah, so the gaudily, overly sized home has to be more energy efficient. That makes sense to me.
And so the other things, like I think in general, aside from flexibility, what we've talked about, there was a lot of cleanup, right? You talked about that very first section where they used to bury, oh, you got to get 5% more savings in your ERI, and then you have to get 10 credits. That whole section got sliced in 2024, and we went more straightforward. The air leakage section, I think we did a good job of fixing the air leakage section. I think between 2018 and 2021, the intent got lost. And I think in 2024, I think we did a better job explaining that there's a prescriptive level of your air leakage. So if you're doing the prescriptive path, you meet this air leakage ACH 50. We added the metrics for multifamily. And then in 2024, we were able to increase rigor, reduce the ACH 50 in some climate zones. But I think we made this section easier to read. And people who are just listening and not watching this podcast, everything in blue is something that's been modified. It might not be totally brand new, but that's how you find out in the code what's different from the 2021. So from my opinion, we did a better job explaining that if you're doing prescriptive path, these are the numbers you follow. And then if you're doing the modeling pathway, you get a little bit more leeway, right? So the builder who realizes I chose prescriptive, but I'm failing my blower door test, it's not the end. They can switch to the modeling pathway, get a little higher air leakage allowance, but they'll have to make it up with something else. And sampling. If you see on the screen, if you're watching the screen, sampling was not allowed in the 2021. So we've added sampling just for multifamily, not for single family, but it's a similar process. It's inspired by the ResNet sampling protocols.
Okay. Yeah, this is a big step forward. And finally, I think it's clear. And to people who are scared of these advanced versions of the code, what I can tell you is if you're in a cold climate and you're a builder, this code offers you more flexibility in air tightness than if we went back to the 2012. And I don't think most people get that because in the 2012, you had mandatory tightness levels of 3 ACH 50 in cold climates and then 5 in warmer climates. With the 2021, it was pretty clear, maybe not perfectly clear, but basically if you were going prescriptive, yes, you had to meet those levels. But if you went performance or ERI, you could trade those off up to 5 ACH 50. Now in the 2024, we buttoned down a little bit. That's air tightness is one of the levers that we can pull in order to make the code more energy efficient. And so the levels have now gone down to 2.5 in cold climates, in very cold climates, that is. So 6 through 8 stays the same in 3 through 5. And then it gets a little bit tighter down there in those hotter climates, 0 through 2. But again, you can trade off in any of these climates up to 4 ACH 50 if you're using a performance methodology. And then there is additional consideration for attached dwelling units. You can use a CFM 50 per enclosure area, which tends to be a little bit more favorable. It factors in the fact that there may be some leakage. Basically, that's more across dwelling units. It may be more of an environmental quality issue rather than necessarily an energy penalty. I do think that these are major enhancements, and I'm glad that you pointed those out. I'm going to go and pick one that I think is unheralded, but I think actually quite beneficial, which is this provision. In cold climates, you cannot heat the whole home with electric resistance heating unless you have a very airtight home and well insulated home. Tell me if I'm wrong about how this reads, but the way I read this is that there was a specific provision basically put in to limit the usage of electric resistance heating. Am I wrong?
No, this came out of, I think, the Pacific Northwest. I think this might have been in their energy code. So the language is a prohibition of just using electric resistant space heating to heat your home. You can, like you said, if your home only is a tiny home or a small home, only needs 2 kilowatts of electric resistance to meet its heating load, that's totally fine. The point was if you were going to do 3 kilowatts or 5 to do the whole home with electric resistance, that's what's being limited here. And so all you'd have to do if you are really focused on doing electric resistant baseboards everywhere, you have to install 1 heat pump. So the language says, as long as you install a heat pump in the largest space that is not being used as a bedroom, so let's say your main living area has a heat pump, you can still have unlimited electric resistance in the rest of the house. So those are the kind of the choices. It is to limit how much electric resistance is being used, because I think we all know just because it's 100% efficient doesn't mean it's the best choice in terms of overall energy performance.
Yeah, and the reason why this matters to me is that I am in a cold climate. And in Michigan, we have very high electricity rates. And a sneaky thing that people didn't realize about prescriptive compliance is when you went prescriptive, you could put in electric resistance heating. And there was no prohibition on it. On R405 and R406, you'd be penalized pretty significantly in those methodologies for using electric resistance heating, but not in the prescriptive approach. And so hypothetically, someone could have built to the prescriptive code and then put in an electric furnace or a baseboard heater, and that would have been just fine. And the problem is that is just so expensive to operate. This is a sneaky, and I think a lot of people would just think it's like a throwaway, but it's very important. This is actually, in my opinion, humble opinion, something that will ensure savings are equitable across all the compliance paths, and it won't give a perverse incentive for someone to potentially follow the prescriptive path, but then put in extremely inexpensive first cost equipment, but equipment that's going to cost homeowners an arm and a leg for a very long time. Because the one good thing you can say about electric resistance equipment is it tends to be pretty durable. But that's the problem, is if you put it in once in a home, you may not ever put in anything ever again, or it's going to cost the homeowner a lot in order to possibly retrofit their home. So this is a sneaky little thing. I'm also going to do a twofer here along with talking about software tools. This is something that Rich had highlighted. And one thing that is new in section R405 is that now those software tools have to be hourly calculation tools. And for most of us, maybe we don't care. A lot of the market has moved to using Ecotrope software, which is a hourly software tool, apparently. And fastest hourly modeling tool in the history of the world. But REM rate and REM design historically have been seasonal tools, including their application for code compliance. For ERI and HERS ratings, they've had to move to hourly calculations due to a ResNet policy change. But for their R405 compliance, they have not. Now, ostensibly, they are going to have to implement that same time-consuming hourly calculation for the 2024 IECC section R405. That's very nerdy. So wait, I better spin my hat around here because I'm not allowed to be that nerdy as a builder. But very nerdy, but something that I think is important and worth mentioning here. Before we move on to the 2027, anything else that anybody want to highlight about the 2024 they think is awesome, or maybe just a sticky thing that we got to pay attention to?
I just wanted to add, in this section while you have it, the section that Rich was mentioning, this was a proposal from PNNL to get to level the playing field across software. And so this is a section, it's all in blue, testing required by software vendors. I just want to make sure I manage expectations about what this actually provides. It's not to the extent that it's accredited software. This is a test result following an ASHRAE standard 140. It does not require that the software presents testing results in accordance with the 2024 R405 or 406. It is not specific to the simulation rules that are part of the code. It is one step forward, as I think most folks know, the energy code can't point to anything proprietary. So while ResNet, a lot of people here are familiar with ResNet, they do have accreditation procedures for their proprietary HERS ratings, right? So they do go through a vetting process to make sure software is calculating their HERS index appropriately in accordance with the standard. That was just something we could not get into the code, that level of accreditation and rigor. So this is the least we could do. You can only point to standards. So this was bare bones. It is a step forward, especially with that hourly simulation. So you should get rid of a few of maybe the poor players in the software world, but it might not get to the extent that some of us would have liked.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stuff that football in Jerica's pouch there and say I think the IECC should be accrediting the software tools for energy code calculations. I think it's something that would be a necessary thing for somebody to take on, and why not the ICC? But we can, anyway, I don't know. What do you think about that, Jerica? You ready to take that on?
I think that's a great idea, and I think we're going to talk about it next Friday.
That's right, yeah. Okay, so jump into the 2027, and the 2027 is still in development, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on it because in some ways it's still, I'd say, conceptual. It's still being worked through. Here's the intent, and we're just going to focus on residential. I don't know. Rich, tell me what's the intent. A lot of this ends up reading a little bit like double speak sometimes. So what is the real intent here?
The ICC board's perspective, they have the ability to modify this scoping and intending section. So we're thinking really what they're trying to do is provide us with the boundaries for the committee to really develop the code. We've had a lot of discussions. We've actually sent some clarification requests back to the board as we work on the 27 code. I think I mentioned Gayathri and I are working on a proposal of hers that she submitted. And it's been a lot of time in the subgroups to talk about this. And I look forward to trying to refine that as we move forward after the first round of public comments on this. I think what they're trying to do is, provide as much flexibility as possible, looking at trying to appease a lot of the different players that are in the energy code arena that are trying to advocate for their specific or what their beliefs are, and provide a methodology for code officials to actually enforce. And that's I think a real big task to try to accomplish with the energy code, because you've got so many different, I don't want to say competing, but you've got so many different voices advocating for different things. And I think that's one of the challenges being on the 24 and the 27 committee as one of the voting members, is trying to understand everybody's advocation for their particular part of what they want to see in the energy code, and trying to balance that against the interests of how do we make this work effectively and efficiently and in a cost-effective manner. So I think that's really what we were trying to get here, or what the board was trying to get here with their intent. And as we continue to develop the code in the code cycles as we move forward, obviously you see the word zero energy buildings. They recognize that there are communities in our country that want to move to that extent. But we also recognize that there's other communities that are not going to be at that area. So I think that really was what the board's concept here was. And again, as we start to move forward in different editions that have yet to even be started to be developed, I think this is going to continue to get refined and try to bring all those entities together.
And Gayathri, obviously, when we had our last episode talking about the 2024, this was one of the sticky things, was that maybe the intention wasn't clear from the beginning about where to put like electric readiness provisions and things like that. I feel like they made it at least pretty clear that they don't want them in the main body of the code. Would you agree that it's clear, whether or not you agree with that as a decision or not?
Yep. They did make it more clear. So this entire 2027 cycle, everything, if it was going to be greenhouse gas or resilience, everyone knew it had to be a credit or in an appendix. And based on what Rich said, there's this process now. So if a proposal comes up and it's a question about, hey, was this supposed to be, is this allowed based on the new scope and intent, you just email the board of directors and they respond within 30 days. And so we did have proposals to actually strike the electric readiness appendix and some other of the appendices. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about them, but there's a lot of new appendices in the 2024 EV readiness, electric readiness. And so there were proposals to remove those, saying, no, this is not part of the code, shouldn't be in there. But they said, no, that's basically what we said in this highlighted bullet. Yes, that kind of stuff belongs in an appendix. So that helped the committee. We didn't get that kind of mid-process input from them and clarification. So that's nice that this year they're doing that. So then the committee knows that, yes, this is allowed to be in there. They can disapprove those proposals. This appendix can stay. I think the other thing it did a slightly better job of is about promoting or eliminating fuel sources. I think we all understood previously that you have to allow pathways for gas and electric in the main body, but they do say that in one of these sections about that fuel type. So none of the provisions in the main body they all remain fuel neutral.
Yeah, which is somewhat of a contentious topic here because obviously we've talked a lot about it on the BERcast, the move to electrification. Is it a good thing? Is it not a good thing? And now here we are, we're having a different conversation. Careful what you wish for. You can push so hard that you start going backwards. But in New York State, we'll be talking about this soon. Maybe even with you, Gayathri, we may have you back to talk about what's happening there because they're saying, forget about all this. We are going with an all-electric code. Similarly, Washington State fought some pretty hard battles over maybe not prohibiting fuel-based heating and water heating, but practically eliminating it in the code. And obviously the ICC went through the process to make it clear that was not the intention here. Jerica, from your perspective, being on staff with ICC, do you want to add anything, about the intent, or maybe specifically compared to 2024?
Yeah, I think what I was going to add is that as an instructor, I always start with the intent section of the code. In all previous versions, I've done the same thing. It used to be much simpler, but it really sets the tone for what's allowed in it. And I think 2024, Rich alluded to it, but there was no public input allowed in the 2024 intent section. And it was, in my personal opinion, not my staff opinion, rather poorly written. And that led to a lot of confusion, which you've already discussed. And what I like about 2027 is there was an attempt to bring in more say from the public. We did open the intent section up for comments. And I think that we made a lot of improvements in the intent section. I do think we cleaned up a lot of that ambiguous language. I still don't love some, even in the commentary, I don't like the use of optional appendix because all of our appendices are optional. They're only mandatory if you adopt them. So I think there's still some of that kind of wishy-washy language that exists, but this intent section is so much better than the 2024. I won't say better, it's a lot more clear than the 2024. And I think that thinking about some of these appendices that resulted in that, I think we are starting to see jurisdictions that are moving towards adopting those. I know Montgomery County in
Howard.
That's the one
Howard
Don worked for, right?
Yep, Howard.
Howard County, they're going to be adopting some of the appendices as part of their base energy code. But I think that not including them has also allowed for some of the states, like my own state in Idaho, to consider skipping the 21 and moving to the 2024 because those are not necessarily included in the base energy code. It's allowed for some of these states that have maybe lagged behind to be interested in the 2024. So I think there's a trade-off there on not including them in the base code.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I know Illinois definitely adopted some of the appendices when they went for the 2021. I know Michigan, my home state, was intending to go with the 2021 plus the renewable ready appendix, but the home builders have sued the state, and so we're in a holding pattern for now. Looking to the 2027, though, where the rubber meets the road, I know we're still in development here, but maybe give me a little bit of a sneak preview just very quickly. Jerica, there's one thing you think that we maybe can get excited to see come out of this, or is it too soon to say?
I think that's probably a better question for Rich and Gayathri. What I know I've participated in some of the meetings just as a listener. I'm not really allowed to participate beyond that. I think that we're looking at even more cleanup, which anytime we can make the code more user-friendly, I think those are big wins. We didn't talk about it, but the 2021 cleaned up that mandatory provision in the code section title, and we carried that through 2024. I think we're going to see more of that usability and more of just that, the editorial cleanups that way. But I think Rich and Gayathri would be better able to speak to the specific requirements that they're excited about.
Rich, what do you think?
I definitely agree with Jerica. I like where we've been going with a lot of the cleanup. I think you're going to see some advancements in Chapter 5. I really haven't seen major wholesale changes per se. I've advocated for a while that, hey, we had to pump the brakes a little bit to allow jurisdictions and builders and everybody catch up. So I think maybe the 27 may result in some of that as well. So I'm excited there. We've talked a lot today in this cast about the R408 provisions, and I think one of the things that I try to convey when I'm in front of my peers in different parts of the country is to really understand the intent of 408. On 21, you indicated we had these changes to the efficiency provisions or the thermal efficiency provisions of the prescriptive provisions of the code. I'm hoping that 408 really takes that opportunity to see that in the future away, and that we really, as a group, really focus on the 408 to continue to see the energy advancements for each edition of the code, where we can make cost-effective changes and make advancements there. So those are just some of the things that I'm excited about. I don't know that we've seen as many code changes that have been approved by the committee as we've seen in the past, but I think there are definitely going to be ones that are more focused on improvement and cleanup provisions.
Okay. I view the codes, sometimes they're almost like Star Wars trilogies. They come in groups of 3. You had the 1998, the 2000, and then the 2003 IECC. Man, they were just getting off the ground, barely. And they looked and felt closer to the old MECs, probably, the model energy codes. And then you look at the 2004 supplement to the 2003 code, the 2006 and the 2009, they were like kind of companions. They looked and felt pretty similar in a lot of ways, although the 2009 certainly had some more improvements. 2012 through 2018, they were practically the same code, just with a little bit of cleanup. I see that maybe with the 2021, 2024, and then 2027, and who knows, maybe 2030 will be something totally radical. Gayathri, you've got the last word here. What should we anticipate with 2027? Is it going to be a letdown like episode 9 of Star Wars, or what are we thinking?
I would say it's going to be strange. I think you should prepare to be underwhelmed by the changes. There's not a lot of changes that you'll see like in that blue font, but it is going to advance the code when PNL does their determination, because as of right now, I'm talking about right now, the committee is voting on the first draft right now. So of all the ones that have been approved, this might change by December when it goes out to public comment. Like the credits in 408 are going to go from 10 to 15, right? Just by that on its own will increase and create a positive determination when P&L analyzes it, because that's 5 more credits. There's going to be a lot more credits to choose from in R408. And then the parity, we changed 406. You're going to see the ERI targets not drop significantly, but at least 1 credit like they did 2024, right? In 2021, they were a value. 2024, they went down 1 point each. You're going to see another 1 point drop. The R405 table, if it stays as approved, you're still going to see a bifurcation of the performance targets, but it's not going to be based on fuel. It's actually going to be based on climate zone, which is not surprising because performance and impact savings changes by climate zone. We see that in the climate zone targets for the ERI path. Multifamily, I always talk about multifamily. I got a few proposals in that add some of the multifamily requirements that we see in the commercial provisions. I had those brought into the residential. So common sense things like corridors and stairwells should have lighting controls. Like these are slam dunk, cost effective. You'll probably see a few, maybe like less than 10 changes in the main provisions, like 402, 403, 404. Everything else, to Rich's point, is going to be in 408. I think that's the path forward. We're going to add more measures to 408, and then you keep increasing the number of credits that are required to keep seeking improved efficiency cycle over cycle.
Okay. I think that is good. I like getting incrementally better. Sometimes when we take a big step forward, we got to catch our balance before we try to take the next big leap. That 2030 cycle may very well be the next big leap. And you never know. You may even catch me signing up to possibly be on one of these committees at some point. I really appreciate our three guests coming on here. We had a great conversation about the 2024, what to expect if your state or municipality is looking to adopt it, as well as a little bit of a sneak peek of the 2027. We'll probably have these folks back on at some time just to check in to see how things are going. But that's a wrap on this edition of the BERcast. Thank you much, everybody. Thanks to our guests, and we'll talk to you on the next one.